I spent 3 years building a startup. We raised over €500,000 in funding. We were selling our products in over 600 supermarket stores. We had over 15,000 customers coming through our online shop, and we hit a total revenue of €1 million. But then we shut it all down. Hi, I'm Simon, and I co-founded a company that went bankrupt after just being 3 years in business. And what killed the business was not one big mistake. It was rather a series of small, almost unseen mistakes that we didn't even know we were making at the time. And if you're an aspiring entrepreneur and you may be planning on launching your business, watch this video, because in this video, I want to break down 6 brutal mistakes that we did when scaling a physical product in Europe. We had to learn those 6 lessons the hard way. So if you don't want to waste any money, time, or your sanity, make sure to not repeat these mistakes. If you're curious on hearing my full startup story from launch to bankruptcy and everything that happened within those 3 years, make sure to watch this video because I go into every single detail. Let's start with the first lesson that we had to learn the hard way, and that is one of the most ignored facts in entrepreneurship. You actually have to validate if anyone wants to buy your product or service that you're planning on offering before you start building it. Too many first-time founders make the big mistake of falling in love with their product before actually checking if there is a real demand in the market for it. Not validating the demand in the market does not only happen to first-time founders, but it can also happen on a very big scale. One very famous example of that is the company Juiceroo.
A gleaming aluminum box promising to revolutionize nutrition and sold for a staggering $699, yet within 16 months, it would become tech's most infamous punchline when journalists discovered its primary function could be performed with your bare hands. A story that perfectly captures the disconnect between Silicon Valley ambition and consumer reality.
Eventually, they got some really big investors on board and raised over $120 million, only to find out that the customers don't actually want a $700 juice pressing machine. The company Juiceroo has skipped one of the most important steps in entrepreneurship, and that is basically to validate if there is actually a problem that you're solving before going ahead. By skipping one of the most fundamental steps in entrepreneurship, they wasted over $120 million in venture capital and a lot of time, and it was of course very awkward for everyone involved. And it's not only entrepreneurs and innovators who have to test if there is a need for that product or service in the market, but it's also big corporations like Unilever or Coca-Cola who spend millions and millions of customer interviews and market testing before they launch a new product line. They have entire departments that go to incredible lengths of just testing and making sure if the market actually wants what they're about to build.
Very early in my career, I worked for a consumer goods manufacturer, big company called Procter & Gamble. And one of the things that I took away was every once in a while you'll read in like the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, whatever, about the crazy lengths that consumer goods researchers will go to figure out how people use like paper towels or something like that. I got to be one of those people for a couple years, and it was fascinating. I've watched so many people clean their kitchens.
At my startup, we of course didn't have millions and millions of market testing budget like bigger corporations, so we had to get creative and do it in a more scrappy way. Since we were focused on introducing a whole new product into an entirely new market, we just basically created some digital renders of what we want the product to look like. We created some Facebook ad visuals for that and basically guided the traffic to a landing page where we asked the people to sign up if they were interested to test the product. On top of that, we interviewed over 100 people face to face and sat down with them and interviewed them about their behaviors and what we could learn from that in order to understand if they would be a buyer for our future product. The result, after we dedicated one entire week only on validating if there is a need for the product in the market, we had 500 signups on our webpage, and we took that as a strong indication that the market actually wants the product that we're going to build. And then once the launch date came, the orders just came flying in. But that was only because we did our homework before we launched the product. The takeaway for lesson 1 is to always validate the demand for your product. If you skip this step, you might be building a product for no one and end up like Juiceroo with a giant awkward launch. The second lesson that I had to learn the hard way is that trying to introduce a physical product to the market is like playing business on hard mode. Compared to digital, physical products are much more expensive, slower to launch, and they're full of hidden operational traps. We didn't know it back in the time, but choosing a physical product as first-time founders was basically like starting a video game in expert mode. And if I say physical product, I'm not talking about anything that we were able to white label and dropship a pre-made product of Alibaba, because we were creating something entirely new that didn't exist at the time. And that meant that we had to go through a lot of research, prototyping, negotiating with suppliers, finding suppliers, applying for certifications, and figuring out the whole logistic part as well. And all of that happened before we could even start reaching out to retail clients or make the first sale on our online website. Naturally, of course, this whole process had to be financed and locked up a lot of capital before we even made our first sale. And since physical products are way more expensive than digital products because you need to buy material, you have to invest in production batches, you have to invest in sampling, you have to invest in logistics, you have to invest in warehousing, and all that stuff, of course, eats away your margin. So essentially it becomes a low margin business that's dictated through large sales volume and is really a hard market to break into and to become successful. So the main takeaway from this lesson is, if you are new to entrepreneurship, try starting with a digital product or a service first. A physical product can be very powerful, but given that it's so hard to manage and it's such a low margin business, it can be very unforgiving. The next lesson is all about what we did with the first money that we ever received from our investors. Because we raised a pre-seed round of 250,000 euros, and for us as first-time founders, that felt like a massive achievement. Of course, we have never seen that kind of money in a business account before. We were impressed. But of course, now looking back in the bigger picture, 250,000 euros feels only like a drop on the hot stone. So what we were supposed to do with the money of the pre-seed round was just basically to validate the initial traction that we had. And that would include to actually talk to our customers and really understand what our product does to them, to see if our customers would actually stay with the company and have a good customer lifetime value, if we were able to acquire them through other sales channels, and even more crucial, if our CAC to LTV ratio would be sustainable in order to grow the business profitable. But instead of actually continue doing our homework and understand if the product that we are building can actually be turned into a profitable business, we just immediately tried to scale what we had at the time. And it was not because we were reckless or something like that. It was just that back in 2021, every startup around us was just raising big and growing fast, not caring about profitability, just about growing the customer base and then worrying about making money down the line. So I think back then we were not the only startup that got pulled into this momentum trap of 2020 and 2021. But eventually scaling before actually understanding if the KPIs of our business were valid turned into a huge problem for our business down the line. Because we were pouring money into customer acquisition channels like meta ads, influencers, or other collaborations, and we were acting like we already proven the model when we actually hadn't done that at all. So we basically started spending money like a real company before understanding if we even had a business. But of course, now looking back with only 250,000 euros in your bank account, even when your customer acquisition channels are profitable from the first start, it is not a huge budget to scale a physical product and to actually gain relevant market share. So the bottom line, that with the pre-seed round, we set expectations for ourselves and our investors that we were actually further along in our journey than we actually were. The takeaway of this lesson is, first, don't raise too much money, and if you raise a pre-seed round, don't get carried away and use the first money that you have in your business account after actually having launched your product in order to answer the hard questions. Because scaling before validating is not bold, it's just simply expensive. The next lesson sounds very obvious, but we really underestimate it. Your team will make or break your company. At some point in your journey, you as a founder will arrive at one point where you're not able to do everything yourself anymore. Even if you have great co-founders, when that point in time comes, the quality of your first hire sets the ceiling of what is possible for your business. And here are the following 3 points of what made it super hard for our startup to find our first key hires. The first point is the location, and the location really matters. Back then, we were based in a city with around 400,000 inhabitants in the south of Sweden, which is not exactly a buzzing startup hub. If you compare it to other major cities like Singapore, London, Berlin, or San Francisco, of course, hiring really becomes a game of availability rather than excellence. So before starting your company, maybe decide strategically of where you want to position your HQ, because it really will make a difference of what kind of talent you're able to attract into your company. The second point, which made it incredibly hard for us, and that is quite an obvious one, is money. Usually, of course, the best hires have alternative options that they consider for themselves. And competing with bigger companies for salary is basically impossible for your young startup. So what that meant eventually was that it was really hard to find the right people, because you were not hiring for money, but you were selling them the mission of the company and the impact that they have. And here you're of course looking for a different kind of mindset, which makes it even more unique to find someone that combines excellent availability and is also buying into the mission that you have at the company. The biggest lesson here was that we had to really invest time into defining the mission and vision of the company to eventually convince excellent people to join our startup. And the third point that is very hard for startups is to actually find people with relevant experience in the field. And the learning here for us was that we were relying too long on interns and student workers that needed constant onboardings, and their skill gaps usually slowed us more down than it accelerated us. The underlying problem was that more time we were eventually finding us teaching rather than learning from our team, which eventually distracted us and wasted one of our most valuable resources, which was time. Eventually we made the decision to hire key personnel that tick all the boxes, and we were also investing money into them, but by then we already lost time and a lot of momentum as well. The main takeaway from this lesson is, instead of wasting your time with inexperienced interns and student workers, invest early into people that raise the bar and that you can actually learn from. The next lesson is all about the European market. Because at first glance, Europe looks like a dream market. You have 450 million people, you have strong purchasing power, and a growing appetite for sustainable products. But the moment you try to scale, especially with a physical product, you realize how fragmented it actually is. In North America, you operate in one single integrated market. One language, one currency, one legal framework, and one psychology. You can ship to over 300 million people with the same label, with the same logistical setup, and with the same marketing funnel. In Europe, however, it's a whole different ballgame. Instead of one coherent market, it's a patchwork of 27 mini markets. And in those 27 markets, you find over 24 languages, multiple currencies, different tax systems, and completely different retail networks across every country. So again, for us with a physical product, every time we entered a new country, it actually felt like relaunching the business almost from scratch. And why is that? Well, because we had to translate packaging, we had to update compliance requirements, we had to negotiate with new distributors and adjust the messaging for each region. Even something as simple as a barcode or an ingredient description could delay our launch by weeks or even months sometimes. So yes, Europe has a lot of scale, but it comes with also a lot of friction. You can think about it this way, that in North America you have to scale once, and in Europe you have to duplicate with friction in between. The main takeaway from this lesson is that if you're building a company in Europe, you should not assume that your business will scale cleanly across borders. You should plan for fragmentation, localization, and long lead times. If you don't do that, Europe will probably humble you. Also, for all European entrepreneurs, always take into consideration that the main content you watch online on YouTube about entrepreneurship is usually filmed by a North American entrepreneur, which is not facing those kind of challenges. So just keep that in mind. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, we didn't go under because of one big mistake. It was a series of wrong decisions, challenges, and shifts in the market. But one thing we underestimated massively was how much the environment around our company would change and how unprepared we were for it. In just 3 years, from 2020 to 2023, the whole macroeconomics of the entire world basically shifted overnight. Back when we got started in 2020, the macro climate for startup was just perfect. The interest rates were near zero, the capital was very cheap, and VC firms were just basically throwing money out the window and writing checks only based on momentum. Also, end customers had more disposable income and were more willing to try new things. Such an environment rewards fast-growing, growth-focused, and cash-burning startups. Because capital is basically everywhere and expectations are built around speed and not profitability. However, then in 2022, the whole market flipped upside down. All of a sudden, interest rates spiked, inflation surged, and the energy prices exploded. And just overnight, nobody actually wanted high-burning startups anymore. VCs pulled back, customers tightened their wallet, and retailers became much more risk-averse. For our company especially, because we were building a premium and sustainability-focused commodity brand, the turning point came really when customers spent from spending to saving. And in a world driven by price sensitivity, our business model broke fast. As the customer behavior shifted, we were forced to pivot from our online model to an offline sales channel. We had to scramble in order to rewrite our entire go-to-market strategy and push our innovative product into retail channels, which was simply not the best sales channel for those kind of products. But by the time we realized that, the market had already moved on and we lost our momentum completely. In hindsight, it was really incredible to see how fast the market environment can switch and how fast customer behavior can change almost overnight. The main takeaway from this lesson is that basically every business is built for a different macro environment. And you kind of have to keep track of your macro environment and that you're moving in and be ready to shift and adapt once that climate changes. Our company was simply not made for the market that we ended up in, and we paid the price for it. So there you go. Those are my 6 hard-earned lessons that I will definitely carry on into my next entrepreneurial journey. If I would go back in time and start over, those are the 6 things that I would like to have known from the start. I hope that these lessons will help you to avoid some pain, save some money, or just make you feel a little bit more grounded in the middle of the chaos that is going on right now. If you got some questions, feel free to drop them in the comments, and also check out my other videos for honest breakdowns like this. And if this video brought you any value, feel free to like, subscribe, and stick around, and see you in the next video.